Druehl, and he has been working, he's a marine botanist, which I didn't even realize you could be a marine botanist, and I'm jealous now. And he's been playing around with kelp since at least 1964, 1968, around in this area. And so I don't need to say any more. I'll let him just take over. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We got a good crowd tonight. Yeah. Don't neglect the bar. Anyway, I'd like to thank Cindy and her crew for inviting us and hosting us here. I don't think she's here right now, but she's been extremely helpful, a great organizer. The Mermaid Tale, which sponsored my reading of my novel last night, and I don't recognize many of your faces from there. The novel is for sale downstairs, and it's being sold by our friend Michael Mullen of The Mermaid Tale for a great discount price. It's a good story about West Coast living, what you wish you had done, or not. I'd like to introduce my partners, my wife, Ray Hopkins, and Kate Rohauser. So Kate is down on the kelp table in the showroom, or whatever you call that, okay? So let's talk about kelp a little bit. Exactly where to start. Kelp, Vancouver Island. Makes sense. So I'm going to try to give you a big picture of kelp. There's going to be a little science, a little art, and a lot of imagination. Okay? So we'll take it from there. Oh, see? So this is an oil painting that was done a long time ago, as you can see, 1840. The man kneeling is Postels, and he was a Latvian botanist in the employ of the Tsar of Russia when Russia controlled all this shore, all the way down through Alaska, down to Bodega Bay in California. So the Tsar sent these two fellows, Postels and Ruprecht. Our cats were named Postels and Ruprecht at one time. Sent them over to inventory the seaweed resources. So what this picture shows you is that there's a variety of kelp. They come in different sizes. They're very conspicuous, and they're brown. And you tend to think they're plants, but they're not plants, which is kind of unfortunate, because I keep calling them plants. They're plantimals. Yes. They grow attached like a plant. They don't respond too much to external stimuli that you can see like plants. They photosynthesize like plants. But when it comes time for reproduction, they behave very differently. So this is what we call a life cycle. So this is bull kelp. We're probably all familiar with this plant. See, I call it a plant. And that's the big plant. It produces these dark patches. And the patches fall from the blades at the surface down to the bottom and release the spores. Half of the spores grow into microscopic male plants, and the other half microscopic female plants. The female plant produces an egg, and when the egg is ripe, the female sends out a perfume. The perfume causes the male plant, which is somewhere close by, to release the sperm and then attract the sperm. Now, legend has it that a German phycologist or botanist, marine botanist, by the name of Müller-Dietrich, walked into his lab one Monday morning and it reeked of gin. He accused his graduate students of having had a party, and they said, no, Herr Dr. Professor, we have no party, or something like that. Anyhow, it turned out that what he was smelling was this perfume, which had been exuded by a large culture he had over the weekend. And it smelled like gin. So I find it very curious that there are two substances which solicit the same response from both kelp and humans. So that's the planimal. It's sex like animals, and the rest of it is like plants. So I'm now going to show you a bunch of kelp that are around here. The kelp are artificially grouped into three groupings. And the first group are those kelp plants that have a simple morphology. They consist of a blade, a stipe, and a holdfast. And this is about as simple as it gets. This is Laminaria saccharina, and there's three plants. I call this a family portrait. This is a closely related plant. It has a blade too, but the blade splits. But it's still just a blade, stipe, and holdfast. Okay? This is called Laminaria secellii, or kombu. Setchell was a marine botanist at the University of California, and he is very famous for having organized the kelp into the patterns of taxonomic hierarchy that we're familiar with today. He was very famous. And this is Pleurophycus gardnerii. This is the same body plan. You can hardly see it here, but it has a very conspicuous midrib that sets it aside from the other kelp. Gardner lived on Whidbey Island, where he was a high school teacher, and he was a buddy with Setchell. And they worked together on kelp. So they ended up naming a kelp after the other. You never name it after yourself. So I'll call this you if you call that me, okay? And so then we end up with this wonderful situation where you have Setchell and Gardner on the beach together forever. That's a kind of eternity. This is Costaria costata, the five-rib kelp. And it shows the ability these plants have of modifying themselves to fit their environment. The plant on your right was collected from a wave-exposed shore, and it's taken on this very streamlined shape, and it's also much thicker, which you can't tell here, to accommodate the swish of waves. If you were to move that plant with this attachment into quiet waters, you get that shape. The same plant would change shape. Cymothera triplicata, three-rib kelp. Saccharina cecily, the stipeless kelp. This grows quite high up on the beach in wave-exposed areas, and it doesn't have a stipe. Now, recently, using molecular biology, DNA methods of identification, they found a plant that looks just like this, but it's different. And that's called a cryptic species, because we can't tell them apart unless we go into the lab and look at the DNA. The cryptic species was named Saccharina druehlii. I don't know why they gave me a cryptic one. Oh, did I forget to tell you my name is Louis Druehl? Okay, this is the second group of kelp, and these are called the winged kelp, and they're famous for having wings that come off the stipe, and the wings are associated with reproduction. In other words, with a simple kelp, reproduction happens on the blade. There's a vegetative blade. Here, we've separated those two functions so the vegetative blade can grow and erode and grow and erode and not jeopardize the reproductive potential. Okay? This is Alaria marginata, very common around here. This is Pterogophora. It's called the walking kelp. That's a First Nation name. It grows attached to cobble, rocks like this, like smaller than, like a baseball or a softball. It grows in areas where there are surge channels. So if you imagine, it tides out, you see these nice rocks, and it will grow attached to those rocks. Now, in the beginning, when it starts to grow, everything is fine. But when it gets bigger, all of a sudden when the waves come by, it gets jerked. And pretty soon, it's so big, it starts to walk around. So the First Nations people called it the walking kelp. They would take big plants of these, pick them up with a rock attached, and produce fences to herd fish into traps. Okay? But they're not the only ones to use these. The stipes of the walking kelp, which can be up to 6 feet high, are also used by eagles. Here is an eagle's nest lined with pterogopher stipes. Okay, this is Icenia arborea, no, excuse me, new name. Ecolonia, I think it's got changed. Ecolonia arborea. It grows Nootka Sound, Barkley Sound, Southern California. Nowhere in between. Now, how did that happen? What we think, what I think, nobody will really take me up on this, is that during the sea otter fur trade, these ships would come out of England loaded down with mirrors and needles and buttons and all kinds of stuff, and they would sell it to people in Southern California and Mexico. The ship is empty, so they just take rocks off the beach. They throw them in, they sail up here, they throw the rocks off onto the beach and bring up this plant with it. Then they fill the boat with sea otter pelts. They go to China, they sell the pelts. They go to India, they buy tea, they go to England and retire, if they make it. So that's my theory is how it got here. This is Egregia, the feather boa. It reminds people of the feather boa that the girls used to wear, back in the 30s and 40s, and even earlier. But of course, this is very organic. But you can't have a costume party on the West Coast without somebody reinventing the feather boa. Okay? Egregia is Greek for remarkable. And it's just a bewildering plant to try to understand how it grows. But it has these appendages on the side which qualify it as the so-called winged kelp type. The last group of kelp, it's an artificial grouping again, are those that branch. And the branches are the product of splitting. So here you're looking at bull kelp, and if you look at it real close, you see each blade is at various stages of becoming 2 blades. And those 2 blades will become 4 blades. You can see the lines. And what happens is, in the middle of the blade, running longitudinally, there are a series of cells that die, and that just weakens that part, and so there's splits. So this is the way you get branching in the bull kelp. So this is Postelsia. So we had Pleurophycus garnerii. So Anyway, Postelsia was one of the duo that came over for the Tsar of Russia. So Ruprecht named this Postelsia. And you can be sure that Postelsia named a few after Ruprecht, his buddy. Okay. So this is a sea palm. It grows very high up on the beach, and it only grows where the surf is strongest. It will withstand up to 40 times the pull of gravity in the force of waves going by. It's a phenomenally strong plant. So every year, we always go, when we have our class in Bamfield, where I'm from, we go out to Cape Beale, and we perch up on a rock looking down on a Postelsia bed, and we always give them the same lecture. Mark Denning at Stanford University determined the forces this plant can withstand. So we're going on about how wonderful it is, and here comes this big wave. Whoosh! And one plant, I call it the Charlie Brown plant, goes like, woo! Didn't quite pull it. It's like the football gets yanked away, right? Anyway, the sea palm, a beautiful, beautiful plant. This is Macrocystis, the giant kelp, and a plug for my book that I gave a talk on last night, and it's for sale downstairs and also for sale at the Mermaid's Tail bookstore. Anyway, it's a plant that has splitting that happens at the top. So you see the little blades get bigger and bigger and bigger as you go away from around that spiral. So Macrocystis, or the giant kelp, well fits into this definition. The stained glass window is a creation of my neighbor, and he had it done. Who did the? Chihuly did the glass work, and my friend Boomer traded a 5-acre lot on an island for the work. It's on the house next door to ours. Unfortunately, he's not here to enjoy it. Did I go too far? Yeah, okay, yeah, that's not it. Okay, this is Undaria, or also known as wakame. It's a very popular Asian sea vegetable. It grows naturally in Japan, and unfortunately on the hulls of freighters. A hull of a freighter that's been parked for a while in Japanese water will look like it has a hula skirt of this kelp around it. So the freighter goes chug, chug, chug first, New Zealand, then to Australia, then Argentina, Chile, Southern California, and it'll come here sooner or later. So it gets around. This is another one of the branching kelp. This only grows subtidal in Southern California, but I like to show this picture because it shows that kelp can take on the habit of being a parasite. Once in a while I say things that are stupid and silly. Feel free to respond. Oh, can't miss that one. So this is the dragon kelp that was named after me, and it existed as my kelp for about a year. And then one of my colleagues discovered that there was an older, higher precedented name that should be applied, so he stripped me of my honor. Anyway, the dragon kelp grows from Haida Gwaii across the top of the North Pacific down to Hokkaido. The plant gets to about 30 meters long and about a meter wide, and it's an annual. It does all that growth every year. It starts over from scratch. So I was very pleased to have that made, but legally, I'm in the book. I'm in the book. You just have to put knee Druehl instead of Druehl.
You made the book.
So I've shown you quite a few of about 27 species that grow along the shores of Vancouver Island. Didn't show you all of them. We have the richest kelp flora in the world. And the reason for that is we have two kelp floras. We have essentially the California flora, which is shown here in red, which comes up, it's a warm water species, or species, groups of plants that come up to the north, as far as the north end of Vancouver Island. And there are 6 of those. Then there are the cold water species that come down from Alaska and so on. And there are 8 species of those. And they overlap the latitudes that define Vancouver Island. And then there are a bunch of species that go all the way through. So they have a good flora, they have a good flora, we've got a much better flora. Okay? Not only do we have a great flora, we have a dynamic flora. Now this is a picture of Egregia, a southern or warm water species in our area. It grows on the rocks, and the water here has been warming up. It's documented, it is warming up. These agarum then Egregia, would compete with simpler species. And you can see how that rock is draped over. So there would be 2 other species of kelp there commonly, the stripeless kelp and the winged kelp, one of the winged kelps. They're not there. So that's going on because of this dynamism of sorting out who gets this bit of space depending upon the total environmental picture. For Vancouver Island itself, it appears that we have 2 floras. On your shore here in Tofino, you have the very rich flora that has been depicted here on your right, many, many species, just a jumble of species there. And then if you go on the other side of the island, you'll find there are not so many species. There's no species on the other side of the island that is not here. So even though conditions are different there, it's only a matter of sorting out which species can tolerate the inland water conditions. So how are the inland water conditions different? This might be a little confusing, but it's a graph with salinity on the bottom, water temperature on the side. And if you look at those two crosses in the middle, those are the average temperatures and salinities for the two sides of the island using Nootka Sound and Departure Bay as examples. There's no difference. But if you look at it as it's spread out over the year, those kind of irregular polygons, you see they take very different shapes. In the case of Entrance Island, which represents the east coast of Vancouver Island, we find that we get the lowest salinities when the water is warmest. And that's because the water is diluted with snowmelt runoff coming from the Fraser and elsewhere. Okay? Whereas here, you get the low salinity in the winter when the water is coldest. And that's because the runoff is in the form of rain. We're all familiar with rain. Yes. So that's the way the two things set up. And it's kind of dogma that kelp like cold, high salinity water. So some kelp can take the conditions of the opposite, where you have low salinity and high temperature coinciding, which is not a good thing generally. Okay?
Louis, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So if say you have the cold temperature at a river mouth from the fresh water, but the low salinity, how close can kelp come to that river mouth, that estuary?
I think there's some species that come right into it.
So
Yeah.
I think
But
I
a lot
asked
of
you that
species
once
won't.
already. So it's sort of a specific, species specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can put together any scenario that occurs naturally, and you'll find a kelp that grows there. But you might not find a diversity of kelp.
Thank you.
You bet. Oop. Okay, a little bit about kelp in the ecosystem. In our part of the world, in shallow water, kelp is the engine that runs the whole show. The energy trapped by kelp through photosynthesis and distributed to the critters around it is the energy that runs that system. Kelp grows very fast. We'll get some numbers here in a minute. Grows very prolifically in these areas. It releases pieces, it breaks up detritus, which feeds everything from polychaete worms to abalone to on and on and on. It releases dissolved organic matter, which soft-bodied animals can absorb directly from the water. And of course, it can be eaten. So if we look at the actual production, I don't know if you can see these numbers. So these are the amount of carbon that a particular situation will trap per meter square per year. The highest number recorded anywhere is for a Puerto Rico alfalfa field. The alfalfa grows just full out all year long. And it will produce 2,100 grams of carbon per meter square per year. That's just carbon, that's not carbon dioxide. That's a lot of carbon. Nova Scotia kelp bed, 1,700 grams. Macrocystis in Barkley Sound, 1,300 grams. Now that is just one plant in the kelp bed. Nova Scotia, they did them all. We just did the one, we ignored the other species. So had we done the others, we might have bumped them off. Don't know. In contrast, if you look at coastal phytoplankton, it's 200 grams per meter square. So on a world scale, if you're getting that kind of production by phytoplankton, they are by far the most important. But in the narrow niche of immediately onshore situations, the carbon is trapped by kelp. Somebody might be on the eelgrass team here. We will not be hearing from you at this talk. So the carbon that is trapped by kelp is trapped in a very particular ratio. So there's different isotopes of carbon. So for whatever reason, the kelp will draw in a very specific ratio of these isotopes, so that when you look at the isotopes of carbon in a critter, you can determine where that carbon came from. So here's some numbers. Mussels, 38% from kelp. Barnacles, 85% from kelp. Sea stars, 51. The cormorant, 48. Now I want you to think about the cormorant and how far away it is in the food chain from kelp. The cormorant eats fish. And these fish might even eat smaller fish. And anyway, some fish is going to eat something like an isopod or a copepod or an amphipod, little invertebrates. And somewhere down there, one of these critters is going to be nibbling on kelp or sucking up kelp juice in the form of organic matter. So that's really quite striking. So kelp is very important to the overall system. Let's look at humans and kelp for just a moment. So up until quite recently, it was generally believed that the, that's not on there, is it? There's a word on top. Anyway, it was believed that there was a land migration from Asia to North America over a land bridge, the Bering Sea land bridge. When we look at the distribution of sites along that route, proposed route, and look for the oldest one, what was possibly the first arrival of people in the Americas, we can date back to 13,500 years ago. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the Bering Strait theory was proved false.
The which?
The Bering Strait theory, the migration that was proved false recently.
Yeah, it has been?
Yeah.
Oh, well, this probably
Just
helps
another
you.
theory.
Anyway, the oldest one that I was able to find a record of was 13,500 years ago. This would be a site where somebody had lived and left evidence of being there and being human. Whereas if you follow the kelp highway hypothesis, you can go all the way down to the southern tip of Chile, and you find sites which are about 1,300 years older than if they had gone down the middle. Okay, so it's fun. I mean, when I see stuff like that, I get really excited. I guess. On a more local scale in transportation, there are two forms of the giant kelp. If you go down, say, off Los Angeles, and you look at those kelp beds, there's a massive beds offshore. They get the full sweep of surf. They're in deep water, and they last for a long time. They live for a long time. You go out here and you look at your kelp beds, those plants, giant kelp beds, they live for maybe 2 or 3 years, short life. They're always just around the corner from the surf. They're never right in the surf, okay? So those plants of that type we find essentially from Alaska down to about Monterey. The other one that grows in deep water, full surf conditions, is found up to about Monterey, and then is found again in Haida Gwaii and a few sites in southeast Alaska. It's proposed that at one time, that bigger plant formed a continuous bed that went down all the way down to California, and also kind of flanked along the west coast of Vancouver Island. And First Nations talk about a time when they could canoe on the west coast of Vancouver Island when they have stormy conditions, because they get on the inside of the bed filters out some of the wave energy, and so they have a little bit of a protection there. But that's not there anymore. For whatever reason, we don't know that. And we don't know if it was there before, actually. Okay, some commercial stuff. In this province, wild harvesting of seaweeds is conducted by the provincial government, or overseen. So they require that we harvest by hand. We harvest plants in such a way that they continue growing and reproducing after we've harvested them. In other words, the plant's there, we take some of it away, like you cut your grass, and it comes back. That's sustainable. And no more than 20% of the plants in any particular bed can be impacted by harvesting. Is that the last one? Oh, yes, and we only have a license that goes for 1 year. So we have to reapply every year. That means that we have to get First Nation approval, we have to get government approval, and we can't talk to the bank. The bank will not give you a loan for a business that has a year-to-year license. They just won't do it, which is really quite a pain. So in the last year there was data, before this talk at least, up to 2014. There were 58 licenses, 1,000 tons were harvested, and they netted $38,000 to the government. The licenses mostly go in any one area. They would go for herring roe on kelp, and most of those licenses are First Nations held, but they're very valuable. They're not as valuable as they used to be. It used to be a really hot industry. And beyond that, there's a fertilizer company up around Port Hardy that has a few licenses. And ourselves, Canadian Kelp, we have some licenses for food and other items. And that's pretty well the distribution. It's pretty small potatoes, actually, if you get right down to it.
So we can't go out on the beach and harvest some kelp to take home for our salt shaker?
Yes, I think you can. I think this is just commercial.
Ah,
And tied into this, when we go out and harvest kelp, we have to meet their conditions, and then they come out and they have to inspect our facilities. So, because we're producing food, so we're licensed to handle food. So, for example, in Bamfield, there's only 2 things that you can buy fresh that are harvested, or that are fresh from the sea: Nova Scotian lobster and kelp. Everything else, crab, has to go to port, go through a packing house, come out. Mussels, gooseneck barnacles, all the fish, they all have to go through a registered packing house to be certified. Okay.
How do you get Nova Scotia lobster in Bamfield?
Yeah, that's curious. So there's a fellow just moved to Bamfield a couple of years ago, and he opened up a gooey duck seed production facility. So Kate works with him, and his company has connections with a licensed outlet in Nova Scotia. So a couple years ago at Christmas, he brought in a few hundred pounds of lobster for the locals. It was really quite. There are advantages of living at the end of the road. You know? By the way, the end of the road is a great topic inside my novel, Cedar, Salmon, and Weed. Okay. So here is Ray sustainably harvesting a bull kelp. So she's cutting the blades off, but she's cutting them off, leaving maybe about almost a foot of blades attached to the float. All the growth takes place in that first few inches and adds to the blade. It's like a conveyor belt, new at the bottom, old at the end, and at the end it keeps dribbling off, feeding things with detritus. This is kombu, or Laminaria seychellii, harvest. The pale colored blades were harvested about a month before this picture was taken, and they've grown back. The dark colored blades, which you see here and there, were not harvested. So we can distinguish the two for a short time. If you cut the blade off the full plant, you kill the plant. You have to leave that little nubbin for growth. Those plants live up to 25 years, and I swear on a stack of Bibles, I've harvested some of the same plants, maybe for 10 or 12 different times. I can almost hear them scream, "Let me off this time." Anyway, sustainable is the word there. And here's Kate and Ray and a couple of other folks going out to do a harvest. So some of the beaches we harvest, we can't take the big boat up to. The big boat being 16 feet, we're not talking about big. So we have to launch them in this little bathtub thing, and they paddle through, in this case, through a big bull kelp bed to get to the shore where the winged kelp thereafter grows. It's actually quite fun to harvest, by the way. And here they are on the shore, or somebody's on the shore, whacking away, kind of trying to concentrate on what you're doing and knowing there's a wave with your name on it. So here's the whole process, just looking at macrocystis, or we call macro kelp in our products. It's harvested sustainably. We put them in these large tarp baskets in the boat. They're transferred to a pickup truck, driven up to our driving shed, and they're hung to dry. About 36 hours later, they lose about 90% of their weight as water, and they're dry. They get put in a box and stored, then they get packaged and go to the market. So the same happens with all of our products. Once a year, we haven't been able to do this for a couple of years, we do a big harvest for a nutraceutical company. Nutraceuticals are things which are extracted from plants and put in other foods to make them better for you. That's a nutraceutic. So here we're working with the Ohiots, and we're harvesting, I think, between 10 and 12 wet tons of kelp. We have to do it in one tide. So a big reefer comes in. This is a big refrigerated truck, and he's sitting up there idling away, and the nutraceutical guy's looking at his money go down the drain while the truck waits for us to do our job. So we hire the whole village. We all go out. We take out herring skiffs, all kinds of boats. We whack away at this stuff, sustainably more or less, and bring it back. It's all put into barrels. The barrels are put in the truck, and inside of 6 hours from going out at the first light of dawn, the truck is on the road with freezing kelp. Okay, let's look at farming a little bit. So what farming is simply growing plants that you've started in the lab out in the field on a rope structure. There's no tillage of the soil, there's no fertilizing, there's no pest control, there's a lot of praying. So, in farm kelp, we don't use farm kelp for most of our sea vegetables. That's not totally true, but we don't use it for most of them. That is true. But it's a great way of getting kelp when you need a lot of kelp and you don't want to interrupt the natural system. So you can think about things like using kelp for biofuel, fodder for sea urchins, abalone culture, fodder for cattle and such, fertilizer for human food, for erosion control, for marine de-acidification, and for fish habitat renewal. So those are some of the reasons why you would farm kelp.
De-acidification, would that help in freshwater systems?
No, kelp can't grow there. No, it only works in marine.
But I imagine, Louis, did it, because I'm thinking that's what the problem was with the scallops on the inside of the island. They figured the acidity of the water. So in conjunction with maybe a scallop farm or an oyster nursery, I didn't realize deacidification was a function of the kelp.
Well, the de-acidification could be a function of the kelp.
Deacidification.
Because the kelp would take up the carbonic acid, which produces the acidic condition.
Thank you for that. I just learned something.
Okay. Actually, we're going to touch on that in a moment, Larry. So, and fish habitat renewal. So, the stages of farming. We produce kelp seed at the Bamfield Marine Science Center, known by everybody in the world except for the director as the Bamfield Marine Station. We have a special conditioned room where we control light and temperature and water conditions, and we produce the seed from spores on string. The string is wrapped on a spool. In about 40 or 45 days, all of a sudden it's gone through that life cycle. All the gin smell's gone, all the party's over, and we're ready to be planted out. So you can't really see it here in this picture, but the spool is put over a farm rope. So you put the farm rope through the spool, you tie the string off on one end, and you just shuffle it down. It goes whoop, 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 and plants the rope, 20 meters. You can do it in about 5 minutes. The old way was 2 people would do it. The rope is lying across the boat. One person takes the rope, twists it. There's a little hole. The other person takes a tweezer, takes a piece of seeded string and sticks it in, and then moves on 20 centimeters. That takes hours. That's the way they do it in Japan, but they have good reason for doing it their way. They know how we do it, but they don't do it that way. Anyway, so it's planted. Then you don't do anything except, like I say, pray. You go out and check your farm to make sure a tree hasn't drifted into it and tangled up the ropes and such. And I'm trying to give you an idea of what the farm looks like. The simplest farm is the letter H. You have 2 anchors, 2 floats, and about 5 meters down from the float, you have a horizontal rope, and that is the rope that you grow the plants on. That is the simple farm. A more complex farm is you have a big rectangle, a heavily anchored, strong rectangle with lots of farm ropes on it. And you just snap them on and snap them off. So you don't do anything except wait until it's time to harvest. We can farm all kinds of species. Here are 4 examples. So it gives us some flexibility in what we're doing. So how much production do you get? So we calculate production on the basis of meter of farm rope. So they grow kelp in Scotland on rope, in Japan and here and elsewhere. And so we can compare numbers. It's a very nice and very handy way to do it. And we get all kinds of numbers, up as high as, 45, I think the guy was lying. 24 is reasonable because we actually got that once. 24 kilograms of wet kelp per meter. Okay, that's 50 pounds, over 50 pounds, like that. I say that you can normally expect under any conditions between 10 and 15 wet kilograms per meter of rope. So here's a project where they're trying to reintroduce kelp to an area with the idea of producing salmon habitat. So they're working mainly in areas where there are estuaries where salmon are passing through from the freshwater to the marine situation, not so much the other way. So here they took some of our kelp seed and they planted it in December. March the next year, here are the young bull kelp on the rope. If you look real close, you can probably see a string wrapped around that rope. So there they are in March, and then they get very serious about their growth. So here is a picture of 4 of those lines parallel, and the bull kelp has now come to the surface. And if you go down below, this is what you see. Real dense kelp. And lots of baby fishes associated with it. And that's what they're after, is to get the fish habitat. But they're not trying to produce this habitat in perpetuity using ropes. They're hoping that these islands of kelp will inoculate naturally an area where historically, they swear on a stack of Bibles, there was a big kelp bed. They've lost a lot of kelp beds on the east side of the island, okay? And this is true right down into Puget Sound. So this is a move to restore kelp beds and at the same time produce habitat. Yeah. How'd they lose it? We don't know. We don't know that. That's, we don't. They're ideas. My idea is it's all a function of upland owners and what they've done to the land. So logging, agriculture, urbanization. These things don't happen on this side of the island in any way the same magnitude. So that's my idea. And they will argue, well, maybe it's UV. I say, oh, you have different UV on your side of the island than we have? Or maybe it's temperature, you have different temperature? So a lot of the things that you would take for granted aren't there. But there are possibilities of sea urchin invasions, taking out kelp beds and stuff like that. There are other options, anyway.
DND.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
DND, Department of National Defense is over there.
Oh, okay. So this is one system that we're working on, and we're working with a group called Island Scallop, headed up by Rob Saunders, just up island from here, on the other side, of course. And what we decided to do was grow sugar kelp, which farms very well and hangs down in the water, with bull kelp on the same rope. So we have two crops on one rope. The bull kelp goes up because it has a float, the other hangs down. So if you visualize it from the side, you have a curtain. So the water has to go through that curtain, and as it goes through, things are sucked out, i.e. Carbon, that would lower the, increase the pH. Toxic things, kelp loves to take up heavy metals and such. So it could be, it just makes a more efficient filter if you want to consider it as a biological filter. So here's another use. This is for biofuel. So this fellow at the University of Victoria modeled out the production of farm kelp to achieve enough biofuel to replace 5% of all vehicular fuel in British Columbia. It was a model. He used real numbers, but he modeled, okay? So what he saw for here, for example, he looked at two kelp, the bull kelp and the sugar kelp, and the compositions of them, and he noted that the sugar kelp had a greater potential, which is shown here in red, for the production of ethanol, or what I call kelpinol. Whereas the bull kelp had a greater green bit, and that is for the production of methane gas. Okay. So on your left are some notes on what would be the optimal amount of harvest you could get for this production from wild harvest. And on the right, what you would get from farmed effort. Mind you, it's a lot of farms, 500 kelp farms, okay? But one kelp farm of this type, of these 500, would be the equivalent to all the wild harvest for any 1 year in British Columbia, as it sits today. So it's doable. And if you look at a map from outer space, there's still some free water around the shores. It's not all under rope. And anyhow, it's a real challenge if they're going to take that approach. And the beauty of it is, of course, that if we produce fuel from kelp, we don't have to use petroleum products. We don't have to use biofuels from corn and such, which takes up valuable farm space. So there's some advantage of looking at this. But anyway, that's for the politicians and the biologists to work on. We can work on small problems. Around the island, there are these patches of urchin barrens. And these are patches where the urchins just totally overwhelm the vegetation. There's nothing to eat. So you look down as a diver and you see these beautiful big animals sitting around on this bare rock, waiting for a little dribble of detritus to come from somewhere else. In the roe fishery from urchins, you have to have a nice, fat, rich roe for it to have value. Those urchins, the value of the roe of those urchins is zero. So working with the First Nation people, we decided we would fatten the urchins on the barrens using farm kelp. So here, starting on the top, going counterclockwise, pulling the kelp farm rope. It's 20 meters long. It has about, let's say maybe 8 kilograms fresh weight kelp per meter, pulling the boat. We go out to the barrens and we drop it down on the barrens with weights so that it comes right down to the kelp, and the sea urchins eat it. So they start at the far end and eat in. And the closer they get to the bottom of the blade and the top of the stipe, the more toxic the plant becomes. It's loaded with polyphenolic compounds. These are compounds which break down the digestive enzymes. So the urchins slow down, they don't eat so fast. Mind you, if you left it there, they would eat the whole plant and the rope. But what you do is you just watch it, you monitor it, and then before they eat that last little bit, the growth potential at the top of the stipe, you pull it out. Take it back to the farm, snap it on, and let it grow out again. So we did that, and nothing came of it, but it was fun to work with great people, and we had a cinematographer film the kelp being eaten and all these happy urchins. It's a good project. It has real potential. So, kelp in food. So, it's a superior source of micronutrients. These are things like zinc and potassium and on and on and on. They're totally essential for our good health because they act as coenzymes. They make sure the enzymes and the vitamins are functional. Kelp is a great source of those. It's a reasonable source of some vitamins. It's rich in dietary fiber for the simple reason that kelp carbohydrates are undigestible by humans. It's the glucose units are put together in an unfriendly way. It contains antioxidants. That dark pigment, fucoxanthin, is thought to be a very great antioxidant. Its saltiness is mostly due to potassium and not sodium. There's sodium there, but usually the potassium is about twice as concentrated as the sodium in any particular sample. So you get that salty happiness without getting so much sodium. And also, as recently been discovered, it is a natural source of umami, otherwise initially known as MSG. MSG was first discovered as a natural kelp product. And since then, we found many of these compounds, like MSG, which are produced by kelp. And what they do is they light up a different part in your brain than any other taste. So it's totally unique. So it's been called the new taste. So you have, I don't know if I can do it, salty, sour, sweet, bitter, and umami.
You know what else has umami besides kelp?
A lot of things do, but I don't really know.
Soy sauce.
Yeah.
Is all kelp equally good to eat then?
No, there's variation between the species.
Okay.
And as far as umami is concerned, it hasn't really been identified in a lot of species. It hasn't been looked for. It's really a new concept. It's a new concept.
There's no kelp that you can't eat though?
Oh, no.
If it's too fibrous or something.
Yeah, it might not be
Poison.
pleasant, but there's no poison, no. There is a kelp-like plant called the acid brown seaweed, and it has a pH of about 0.8. It'd be about the same as your gastric juices. So if you ate a lot of that, and urchins eat it, the same thing would happen to you as happens to them. Their teeth dissolve. Actually, it's an Aristotle lantern, but with us it'd be our teeth. So there's that one, but you would spit it out pretty quick.
Does that one grow around here?
Yes, subtitle.
Subtitle.
Yeah. So if you buy my Pacific seaweeds, did I mention Pacific seaweeds? So it is for sale downstairs too, and I'm very happy to say that we've now passed the 10,000 sales mark on that book, which makes it a double bestseller Canadian book. Wow. That's what happens when you sell a Canadian book in the U.S. It's called cheating, but I don't care. Anyway, it has pictures and describes all these phenomena for you. Anyway, here's our kombu, Laminaria sochellii, and it's been used to make dashi. So you just put the kelp into water, and if you're not in a hurry, you just put it in cold water overnight, take the kelp out, feed it to the cat or put it on your potted plant, and then you have this stock. And the stock is rich then in umami. And flavor, it's just flavorful. It's a good stock. And it's very popular in Asian cooking. These are kelp chips, macrocystis, macro kelp. They're low in sodium and high in potassium, low in calories and high in dietary fiber. What's not to like about them? You know, they're great. This is making sushi using macrocystis. So you just use the macrocystis as the same as you would nori, as the wrap for your sushi, okay? So this reference to Ole. Ole is a very good friend of ours. He's a Danish biophysicist that specializes in the physics of biological membranes. And he's the one that came up with the idea of and proved umami was a unique flavor. And he started a new discipline, and he calls it gastrophysics. And his gastrophysics is very popular with people that run old folks' homes. Make that food interesting, okay? Keep it interesting. So it's a new area. It's really quite exciting. And Ole's a great guy. He just does everything. He's a Dane. Kelp brownies. Okay, so here Ray has combined macrocystis, bull kelp, dried bull kelp, with her brownies. So you get the salty tanginess of the kelp along with that rich chocolate taste. And that's a great combo. You can use other ingredients besides kelp on these. So this is a kelp twist. It's a product that we've just come up with. And it's the youngest part of the kelp blade that we harvest. So it tends to be a little more tender and narrower. So when we roast it, you end up with these sticks. And we use them as a swizzle stick. And they'll last in your drink. They're kind of interesting. Bars should love these because it's a swizzle stick that will kind of fall apart if you leave it in too long. So you got to drink up. You know? And then besides that, you can eat the swizzle stick. And we say it justifies that second Caesar. Okay. Okay, so we'll just look at a few things now about kelp in here and there. Anyway, you get on the beach and there's a bull kelp, you pick it up and you do something with it. You scream at your kids, don't, you'll knock your eye out. Or you make rings, do ring toss games, do all kinds of stuff. You can make baskets. These are made from bull kelp and pterogophora, the walking kelp stipes. Now these baskets are really quite interesting because they are like a pet. Now if you think of the spectrum of pets, you have the dog and the cat, high demand, takes a lot of energy to keep them going. At the other end of the spectrum, you got your pet rock, which is really boring after a while. Don't kid yourself, okay? But in the middle, it's the kelp basket. So you want some company and you haven't anything to do. So you think, oh, I think I'll go take a hot, steamy shower. So you take your basket in and you set it on the counter while you have your shower. And the basket kind of gets all soft and soggy. Okay? And then when you get out of the shower, you go out and you put it on the heat register and it goes back up. So it does something. It does. It's got to be better than a rock. We love our dog, by the way. So here's Ray calling me to dinner, so to speak. This is the kelp slinky. So it's the bull kelp top where it's inflated bulb. You just cut it in a spiral, and you end up with a slinky. And it works. But it doesn't make that metallic sound. It's more of a Spielberg slimy sound. Yeah. And then there's the spa world. Okay? Spas love kelp, so they have mud wraps and all kinds of stuff, okay? So this lady, maybe some of you actually recognize her, I hope not. Anyway, this is a Souk Harbor house, and she's in a spa with Costaria, the 5-rib kelp. Here's a clever island person who made a macrocystis dress with fucus accessories. And it was in the contest, and I don't know if he won or not, but we were very impressed because he ordered the kelp from us. We shipped it to him fresh, and it was like maybe 10 days before the actual thing happened. So I don't know what state that kelp was in, but the girl's got to act like, it's okay. It's not forever, is it? And then, of course, there's always beach apparel. And we don't know who that is. So this is our motto, find your kelp. So I argue with my colleagues as to what that means, but I don't care. I know what it means, and it means to you what it means to you. Now, for some people, you might find your kelp in Tofino. Kelp Stout is made by the Tofino brewery using our kombu kelp. Thank you. Yeah.
Kelp in gardening.
And gardening.
Yes, in mulching.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Particular species or.
I think you can take anything, as long as it's not too valuable, and just sprinkle it. In Bamfield, a lot of people do. They just go out on the beach and they just get any seagrasses, kelp, and everything else, and just throw it on top of the garden in the beginning of the winter, so it gets rained on, and then they dig it in at the last moment, or don't bother to dig it in and plant it, and it seems to work really well. I'm not a gardener. I can't really make that testimonial.
Yes, it works good.
It does good. Good. By the way, if you go down and see Kate downstairs, she'll sell you some lovely kelp chips for your garden.